The colony's ship Eternal Dawn floated through the endless darkness of space like a ghost. Its metal hull was covered with scars from 300 years of traveling through the void. Inside, 50,000 humans lay sleeping in pods, their bodies frozen in time, their dreams silent and empty. They had no idea that the galaxy they were traveling through had changed into something terrible. Commander Samuel Grant had been a proud man when he stepped into his pod all those years ago. He was 42 years old, with strong shoulders and eyes that had seen too many battles on Earth. The resource wars had broken something inside him, but he still believed in the mission. He believed that humanity deserved a second chance on a new world, far from the dying planet they were leaving behind. When the cold sleep took him, his last thought was of hope. Dr. Lucy Palmer had been equally hopeful. She was the chief medical officer, a woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and steady hands. She had spent her career healing people, and she saw this mission as the greatest healing of all. Humanity would start fresh. They would leave behind their wars, their hatred, their mistakes. She fell asleep believing she would wake up to a new beginning. But something went wrong. A cascade failure in the navigation system sent the Eternal Dawn drifting off course. The ship's artificial intelligence, programmed to protect human life above all else, made a decision. It would keep everyone asleep until it found a safe destination. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The AI searched and calculated and adjusted, but it could not find the original target. So it kept searching and the humans kept sleeping. Back on Earth, people waited for news that never came. After 50 years, they declared the Eternal Dawn lost. After 100 years, most people forgot it had ever existed. After 200 years, it became nothing more than a sad story in old history books. Humanity on Earth continued its struggles, never knowing that 50,000 of their people were still alive, drifting through the stars. The galaxy, meanwhile, was changing. The Dominion rose from a small empire on the edge of known space. There were creatures, tall and terrifying, with hard shells and compound eyes that showed no mercy. They had evolved for conquest. Their society was a hive mind, millions of individuals connected to a central intelligence called the High. When they decided something, every obeyed without question. And they decided that the galaxy belonged to them. They started with their neighbors, the peaceful. There were traders and diplomats, furry mammalian beings who believed that all conflicts could be solved through negotiation. They sent ambassadors to the offering friendship and trade. They killed the ambassadors and invaded. Within 10 years, the Great Federation was destroyed. Those who survived became slaves or refugees, scattered across the galaxy like leaves in a storm. They moved on to the next. There were beautiful beings made of living crystal, ancient and wise. They had developed technologies that other species could barely understand. But technology meant nothing against the endless swarms of soldiers. There was shattered, its crystal towers broken into dust. The survivors fled into hiding, their numbers reduced from billions to mere thousands. Then came the aquatic creatures who lived in the oceans of water worlds. They were scientists and philosophers, more interested in understanding the universe than fighting for it. They boiled their oceans, turning their paradise planets into steam and ash. The few who escaped did so only because they happened to be off-world when the attack came. Species after species fell to the Dominion. Some were enslaved, others were exterminated. They built monuments from the bones of their enemies and wrote their history in blood. They believed they were destined to rule all of existence, and for 200 years nothing proved them wrong. The High grew confident, then arrogant. It had crushed every civilization it encountered. It had broken every resistance. It ruled over 100 star systems and commanded fleets of thousands of warships. In its ancient, alien mind, it believed it had achieved perfection. It had never heard of humans. The Eternal Dawn drifted into space on an ordinary day. A patrol vessel detected the strange ship and moved to investigate. The commander, a sub-commander named, looked at the primitive vessel with contempt. Its technology was ancient. Its hull was damaged. It posed no threat to the mighty Dominion. Scanned the interior and found the sleeping humans. He studied them with his compound eyes and felt something close to amusement. These creatures were soft and weak. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no claws. They were smaller than and clearly less evolved. They would make acceptable slaves, perhaps, or specimens for study. He sent a message to the High, reporting the discovery of another primitive species. They acknowledged the message with little interest. One more species to conquer was hardly worth its attention. It gave permission to board the vessel and secure the sleeping creatures. Did not know that the Eternal Dawn's proximity sensors had already detected his ship. He did not know that the AI, following its ancient protocols, had begun the awakening sequence. He did not know that deep in the chambers, 50,000 humans were beginning to stir. Samuel Grant was the first to fully wake. His eyes opened to flashing red lights, and the calm voice of the AI explaining that an alien vessel had been detected. His body was stiff and weak from 3 centuries of sleep, but his mind was sharp. He had been a soldier before he was a commander, and soldiers learned to wake up ready for danger. He pulled himself from the pod and fell to his knees on the cold metal floor. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to stand. He looked around and saw others beginning to wake. Lucy Palmer was pulling herself up, her medical training already assessing her own condition. Sergeant Danny Cole, a grizzled veteran who had fought beside Samuel in the worst of the resource wars, was reaching for a weapon that was not there. The AI continued its report. The alien vessel was approaching. Its weapons were charged. Its intentions appeared hostile. Samuel listened and understood. They had slept for 300 years and they had woken up in the middle of someone else's war. They were alone, unprepared, and facing an unknown enemy. But they were human, and humans did not surrender without a fight. Samuel straightened his back and looked at his fellow survivors. They were scared and confused, their bodies weak from centuries of sleep. But he saw something in their eyes that gave him hope. He saw determination. He saw the stubborn refusal to give up that had carried humanity through countless disasters throughout their history. He began giving orders, and the humans began to prepare. They were coming, confident in their superiority, expecting easy prey. They had no idea what they were about to face. Samuel moved through the corridors of the Eternal Dawn with purpose. His legs were still weak, and every step sent pain through his muscles, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago that pain was just information, and right now, he had more important things to think about. The ship's AI had given him the basics. An alien vessel was approaching. It had scanned them. It was sending a boarding party. Samuel had maybe 20 minutes to prepare for first contact with an extraterrestrial species, and he had no idea if they were friendly or hostile. He chose to prepare for hostile. Lucy Palmer caught up with him in the main corridor. She was pale and unsteady, but her voice was calm. She had always been calm, even in the worst emergencies back on Earth. It was one of the things Samuel admired about her. She told him that the revival was causing problems for some of the passengers. 300 years was far longer than the pods were designed for. Some people were not waking up at all. Others were waking up confused and disoriented. She needed time to treat them, time they did not have. Samuel nodded and told her to do what she could. He needed her skills, but he also needed soldiers, and right now, soldiers were more urgent. Danny Cole appeared from a side corridor, and Samuel felt a wave of relief. Danny was 60 years old, but he moved like a man half his age. He had been a sergeant in the worst conflicts of the resource wars, and he had survived things that would have broken most people. His face was hard, but his eyes were sharp. Danny reported that he had found the weapons locker. Most of the guns were still functional, though the ammunition was limited. He had armed himself and was ready to arm others. Samuel told him to wake up every military personnel he could find. They had maybe 15 minutes now. The next 15 minutes were chaos. Soldiers stumbled from their pods, their bodies fighting against them, their minds struggling to understand what was happening. Danny moved among them like a force of nature, shouting orders, slapping backs, pushing weapons into hands. He had trained these people years ago, and he knew how to get them moving. Samuel positioned his soldiers in the main corridor that led to the airlock. It was the most likely entry point for boarders. He put the best shooters in front and the others behind. He wished he had more time, more people, more information. But wishes were useless in combat. Lucy set up a medical station in a room behind the defensive line. She gathered what supplies she could and prepared for casualties. She hoped there would be none, but she knew better than to expect miracles. The airlock opened with a hiss of escaping air. They came through in a wave of clicking legs and gleaming armor. Sub-Commander led them, his compound eyes scanning the corridor with contempt. He had boarded dozens of ships and conquered dozens of species. He expected these soft creatures to cower and beg, as all the others had. Instead, he found Samuel Grant standing in the middle of the corridor, flanked by armed soldiers, his expression calm and his posture straight. Samuel spoke clearly and slowly. He identified himself as the commander of the human vessel Eternal Dawn. He said that they came in peace but would defend themselves if necessary. He asked them to state his intentions. Paused. In his experience, primitive species did not stand and speak when facing soldiers. They ran or they begged. This human was doing neither. It was strange, but it was also amusing. Clicked his mandibles in the expression of laughter. He ordered his soldiers to seize the humans. Danny Cole fired first. His shot was precise, hitting the lead soldier in the joint between its head and body, the one spot where its armor was weak. The creature fell, and before its body hit the floor, Danny had already fired twice more. The corridor exploded into violence. They were fast and strong, but they were also surprised. They had never faced enemies who fought back with such ferocity. The humans were weaker and smaller, but they were also disciplined and determined. They had been trained for war, and they had been trained well. Samuel fired his weapon with steady hands. He had killed before, back on Earth, in wars he wished he could forget. This was different. These were not humans fighting humans over scraps of a dying world. These were invaders who had come to take his people. He felt no guilt as he pulled the trigger. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Soldiers fell one after another, their bodies piling up in the corridor. The humans took casualties too. A young soldier named Peter fell with a blade in his chest. Another named Maria was struck by a projectile and collapsed against the wall. Lucy rushed forward to help them, dragging the wounded back to her medical station, working with desperate speed. When it was over, every boarder was dead except for. The sub-commander lay on the floor, wounded and restrained, his compound eyes wide with an emotion he had never felt before. Fear. Samuel knelt beside him, his voice quiet but firm. He said that they had not wanted this. He said that they had asked for peace and been answered with violence. He said that if this was how they treated strangers, then they would find humans to be very difficult enemies. He told to return to his ship and deliver a message to his leaders. Humanity was awake, and humanity would meet any aggression with overwhelming force. Then he let go. Lucy questioned the decision later, when the adrenaline had faded and the dead had been counted. She asked why he had released an enemy who would certainly return with more soldiers. Samuel explained his thinking. They needed to understand what they were facing. If he had killed, the Dominion would send another fleet without knowing the danger. But if returned with stories of human ferocity, with evidence of defeat, then the Dominion would be cautious. They would prepare, and that preparation would give the humans time. Time to wake everyone, time to repair the ship, time to find allies. Because Samuel understood something that did not. This was not the end of the conflict. It was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the humans worked without rest. Danny organized security patrols and trained more soldiers from the civilian population. Lucy treated the wounded and supervised the awakening of the remaining passengers. An engineer named, a brilliant woman who had joined the mission hopping to build a new civilization, began assessing the damage to the ship. Its report was not good. The Eternal Dawn was old and damaged. Its engines were barely functional. Its weapons systems were primitive compared to what they had shown. If a real fleet came, they would not survive. Samuel listened to her report and nodded. He had expected as much. But he had also learned something during the battle. They were confident, maybe too confident. They had conquered so many species that they had forgotten what it meant to face real resistance. That confidence was a weakness, and weaknesses could be exploited. He asked if she could improve their defenses. She said she could try, but she needed resources they did not have. Samuel smiled grimly and said they would find resources. The galaxy was full of them. They just needed to take them. A schoolteacher named Price approached Samuel that evening. He was a quiet man who had joined the mission hopping to educate the first generation of humans on a new world. He asked what would happen now. Samuel told him the truth. They were stranded in hostile space, facing an enemy that controlled most of the galaxy. Their ship was damaged, their resources were limited, and they had no allies. Asked if there was any hope. Samuel looked at the people around him, the survivors who had woken from centuries of sleep to find themselves in a nightmare. He saw fear in their faces, but he also saw determination. He saw the same stubborn will to survive that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and wars. He told that there was always hope. As long as they were alive, as long as they refused to give up, there was hope. And then he began to plan. The news spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The Dominion had been defeated, not by a great fleet or a powerful empire, but by a single ship full of strange creatures called humans. For the first time in 200 years, someone had drawn blood from the conquerors. In hidden colonies and refugee camps scattered across 100 star systems, the enslaved and the hunted whispered the story to each other. They spoke of the humans who had stood against soldiers and won. They spoke of hope. On the Eternal Dawn, Samuel Grant had no time to think about hope. He was too busy preparing for the response that he knew was coming. They would not accept defeat. They would return with a larger force, and when they did, the humans needed to be ready. Worked without sleep. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes, but her mind was sharper than anyone Samuel had ever known. She studied the weapons they had captured and learned how they worked. She analyzed the alien ship that had left behind when he fled, taking apart its systems piece by piece. Within a week, she had improved the Eternal Dawn's shields by 30%. Within 2 weeks, she had adapted weapon technology to work with human systems. She told Samuel that it was not enough, that they needed more resources and more time, but it was a start. Danny Cole trained every person who could hold a weapon. He pushed them hard, harder than they thought they could endure, but he also taught them to believe in themselves. He told them that they were strong but not invincible. He told them that courage and determination could overcome superior numbers. He told them that humans had been fighting against impossible odds since the beginning of their history. Lucy Palmer organized the civilian population. There were 47,000 people who had survived the long sleep, and most of them were scared and confused. Lucy gave them tasks and purposes. She assigned people to work in the medical bay, in the kitchens, in the repair crews. She understood that busy people had less time to be afraid. Price helped her. The schoolteacher became responsible for the children, organizing classes and activities to keep them occupied. He taught them about Earth, about human history, about the mission that had brought them here. He tried to give them hope, even when he struggled to find hope himself. 3 weeks after the first battle, the response arrived. A fleet of 30 warships emerged from hyperspace, led by High General himself. Was one of the most decorated commanders in the Dominion, responsible for the destruction of entire civilizations. The High had sent him to crush the humans and restore honor. Expected an easy victory. He had read's report, but he dismissed it as the excuses of a coward. No primitive species could truly threaten the Dominion. The humans had gotten lucky, nothing more. He would show them what real power looked like. He was wrong. Had been busy during those 3 weeks. She had used the ship's mining equipment to harvest asteroids in a nearby field. She had built automated defense platforms and scattered them through the space around the Eternal Dawn. She had converted the colonial shuttles into attack craft and armed them with weapons. And she had built something special. The humans called it the Hammer. It was a massive, cobbled together from parts of the mining equipment and the Eternal Dawn's old construction systems. It could accelerate a chunk of metal to nearly 1% of the speed of light. Had not been sure it would work, but she had built it anyway because they needed every advantage they could get. When the fleet arrived, Samuel was ready. He had positioned the Eternal Dawn in the center of the asteroid field, surrounded by defense platforms. The shuttles were hidden behind the larger asteroids, waiting for his signal. The Hammer was charged and aimed. Ordered his fleet to advance, expecting the humans to run or surrender. Instead, the defense platforms opened fire. The first ship exploded before its crew knew they were under attack. The second and third followed within seconds. Screamed orders, but his fleet was already in chaos. They had expected a single damaged ship, not a prepared battlefield. Samuel gave the order, and the shuttles launched from their hiding spots. They were small and fast, piloted by humans who had trained for weeks under Danny's brutal instruction. They swooped between the larger ships, their weapons tearing through armor and systems. The battle raged for hours. They had numbers and firepower, but the humans had surprise and desperation. Every human pilot knew that there was no retreat. If they lost, their families on the Eternal Dawn would be killed or enslaved. They fought with a ferocity that they had never encountered. Danny Cole piloted one of the shuttles himself. He was too old for combat, Lucy had told him, but he had ignored her. He flew his craft into the thickest part of the fighting, his weapons blazing, his voice calm over the radio as he gave instructions to younger pilots. Monitored the battle from the Eternal Dawn's bridge, adjusting the defense platforms, calculating trajectories, looking for weaknesses in the formation. When she saw an opening, she fired the Hammer. The massive projectile crossed the distance between the Eternal Dawn and its flagship in less than a second. It punched through the ship's shields like they were not there and tore through the hull from bow to stern. The flagship broke apart in a silent explosion, taking High General and his command staff with it. Without their leader, the fleet fell into disarray. Ship captains gave conflicting orders. Some tried to retreat. Others continued fighting without coordination. The humans pressed their advantage, destroying ship after ship. When it was over, 18 warships had been destroyed. The remaining 12 fled into hyperspace, carrying stories of human ferocity that would haunt nightmares for generations. But the victory had come at a terrible cost. The Eternal Dawn was crippled. Multiple hull breaches had killed hundreds of passengers. The engines were damaged beyond its ability to repair. Life support was failing in several sections. The ship that had carried them across the galaxy was dying. Samuel walked through the damaged sections, looking at the faces of the dead. He knew many of them by name. He had promised to lead them to a new home, and instead, he had led them into war. Lucy found him standing in a corridor, staring at a wall that had been painted with children's drawings before the battle. The drawings were burned now, destroyed by weapons fire. Samuel's face was empty, but she could see the pain in his eyes. She told him that it was not his fault. She told him that he had saved them from something worse. She told him that without his leadership, they would all be dead or enslaved. Samuel nodded but did not speak. That night, he made a decision that would change the history of the galaxy. He recorded a message and broadcast it on every frequency, in every language that the ship's database contained. He spoke to anyone who might be listening, anyone who had suffered under rule, anyone who dreamed of freedom. He told them that humanity had defeated the Twice. He told them that the Dominion was not invincible. He told them that if they joined together, if they fought together, they could end the reign forever. He invited them to come. He invited them to join. He invited them to fight. The message traveled across the galaxy at the speed of light. It reached hidden colonies and secret bases. It reached refugee ships and slave worlds. It reached the ears of beings who had given up hope long ago. And slowly, one by one, they began to answer. Started receiving signals within hours. Ships were coming. Different species, different worlds, different histories. They were coming because a voice in the darkness had told them that they did not have to be afraid anymore. The alliance was beginning to form. The first ships arrived 3 days after Samuel's broadcast. They were vessels, battered trading ships that had been converted into refugee transports. There were 7 of them, carrying the last survivors of a civilization that had once spanned dozens of worlds. Their leader was a female named. She was old by standards, her fur gray and thin, her eyes carrying the weight of 2 centuries of loss. She had been young when they destroyed her. She had spent her entire adult life running, hiding, watching her people slowly die out. She had stopped believing that anything could change. Then she had heard Samuel's message. She came aboard the Eternal Dawn with caution, surrounded by guards who watched the humans with nervous eyes. They had learned not to trust other species. They had trusted the once, sent ambassadors offering friendship, and received only death in return. Samuel met her in the ship's damaged conference room. The walls were from battle damage, and the lights flickered occasionally, but it was the best space they had. He stood and greeted her with the traditional gesture that he had learned from the ship's database, a slight bow with hands open to show peaceful intentions. Was surprised. She had not expected a human to know her customs. She returned the gesture and spoke through the translator that hung around her neck. She asked why she should believe that humans were different from all the others. She asked what made them think they could defeat an empire that had crushed every resistance for 200 years. Samuel considered her questions carefully before answering. He told her about Earth, about humanity's history of war and conflict. He told her that humans had been fighting each other since the beginning of their existence. They had developed weapons and strategies that no other species in the galaxy had needed to create. They had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. They had nearly destroyed themselves many times, but they had always survived. He told her that humans were stubborn. They did not know how to give up. Studied him for a long moment. She had met many leaders in her long life, and she had learned to read them. This human was tired and scared, but he was not lying. He believed what he was saying. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. She had studied humans during her journey to the Eternal Dawn, and she knew that this gesture meant partnership. She was willing to try. Over the following weeks, more ships arrived. They came next, their vessels made of living crystal that sang when it moved through space. They were few in number, only 3,000 survivors of a species that had once numbered in the billions. But they brought technology that made eyes widen with excitement. Sensors that could detect ships across light years. Communication systems that could not be intercepted. Materials that were stronger than anything humans had ever created. They arrived in converted cargo ships, their water tanks adapted for travel through the void. They were aquatic beings, blue-skinned and graceful, with large eyes that had evolved in the depths of oceans. They could not fight alongside humans, but they brought something equally valuable. They had studied them for generations before their world was destroyed. They knew biology, psychology weaknesses. Other species came too. The small furry beings who had survived by hiding in asteroid belts brought mechanical skills that complemented engineering. The tall and thin with skin that changed color with their emotions brought agricultural knowledge that would keep the growing fleet fed. Dozens of species, each bringing something unique, each carrying the scars of conquest. Samuel organized them into what they called the Alliance. It was not easy. These species had different cultures, different languages, different ways of thinking. Some of them had been enemies before the came. Old hatreds and old wounds did not disappear just because they faced a common enemy. But Samuel was patient. He held meetings and mediated disputes. He listened to grievances and found compromises. He reminded them again and again that their differences were small compared to what they faced together. They would not care if they were or human when they came to kill them. Lucy worked alongside him, establishing medical protocols that could treat a dozen different species. She trained doctors in human medicine and learned healing techniques in return. Her medical bay became a place where different species worked together, saving lives regardless of what world those lives came from. Danny trained mixed combat units, finding ways to combine the strengths of different species. Humans were aggressive and adaptable, were quick and clever. The few warriors who survived were nearly indestructible. Together, they were more dangerous than any of them were alone. Worked with alien engineers to combine technologies. She took materials and knowledge and mechanics and built things that none of them could have built alone. Ships that were faster and stronger than anything the Alliance had started with. Weapons that could hurt warships. Shields that could withstand attacks. Price found a new purpose in these chaotic weeks. He became the Alliance's historian, recording everything that happened. He interviewed survivors of atrocities, documenting the crimes so that they would never be forgotten. He collected stories from every species, building an archive of the galaxy's lost civilizations. A young asked him why he did this work, smiled sadly and explained that stories mattered. They had tried to erase entire peoples from existence. The best way to defeat them was to make sure those peoples were remembered, and someday, when the war was over, their children and would need to understand what they had fought for. The Alliance established its headquarters on a hidden moon in unclaimed space. They called it Hope because that was what they were fighting for. Ships came and went, bringing supplies and refugees and news from across the galaxy. The moon that had been empty and barren began to transform into a busy center of activity. Samuel watched the growth with a mixture of pride and worry. They were building something real, something that might actually challenge the Dominion. But they were not idle. Reports came in of increased patrols, of fleets massing at strategic points, of conquered worlds being stripped of resources to fuel the war machine. The High had recognized the threat. It was preparing to crush the Alliance before it could grow any stronger. Samuel called a council meeting with the leaders of all the Alliance species. He stood before them, these beings who had come from different worlds and different histories, and he spoke the truth. He told them that they were coming. He told them that the Dominion would throw everything it had against them. He told them that many of them would die in the fighting ahead. But he also told them that they had a chance. For the first time in 200 years, the galaxy had a chance. Not because any single species was strong enough to defeat but because together they were something new. They were the Alliance, and together they would fight. Stood and spoke for she said that her people had run and hidden for 2 centuries. They were tired of running. They would fight. The representative, a crystal being named, chimed in agreement. They had been broken, but they had not been destroyed. They would fight. One by one, every species pledged their support. Different voices, different languages, different worlds, all speaking with one purpose. Samuel looked at Lucy, and she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her since they woke up. They would fight together. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. The war lasted 3 years. It was the bloodiest conflict the galaxy had ever seen, fought across 100 star systems, claiming billions of lives. Fleets clashed in the darkness between stars. Worlds burned. Heroes rose and fell. And through it all, the Alliance held together. Samuel Grant commanded from the front lines. His hair turned gray from the stress, and new lines appeared on his face with each passing month. He lost friends and soldiers in every battle. He made decisions that saved thousands and cost hundreds. He carried the weight of leadership like a stone around his neck, but he never stopped moving forward. Lucy Palmer became the heart of the Alliance Medical Corps. She trained doctors from a dozen species and established hospitals on liberated worlds. She worked until exhaustion took her, slept for a few hours, and then worked again. She saved lives that should have been lost and lost lives she wished she could have saved. Every death hurt her, but she did not let the pain stop her. Danny Cole trained the soldiers who would become legends. He was too old for the fighting, everyone told him, but he refused to stay behind. He led missions into territory, rescued prisoners from slave camps, and destroyed supply lines that fed the Dominion war machine. He was 63 years old when he died, protecting a convoy of refugee ships from an attack force. His last act saved over 1,000 civilians, and they named their children after him for generations. Invented the weapons that turned the tide. She worked with engineers from every Alliance species, combining technologies in ways that none of them could have imagined alone. She built ships that were faster than anything they had. She designed weapons that could crack armor. She spent countless sleepless nights solving problems that seemed impossible, and she grieved for everyone who died before her solutions could save them. Price recorded everything. He interviewed soldiers before battles and survivors after them. He documented victories and defeats, heroism and tragedy. He built an archive that would become the foundation of galactic history, a record of sacrifice and courage that would inspire future generations. When people asked him why he did it, he said that stories were how civilizations remembered who they were. The war turned slowly in the Alliance's favor. Liberated worlds joined the cause, adding their ships and soldiers to the fight. Commanders began to defect, refusing to serve an empire that they knew was dying. The High, which had ruled unchallenged for centuries, found itself losing control. The final battle came above the Alliance fleet numbered in the thousands. Ships from 100 different species flew together, their crews united by a common cause. Samuel commanded from the bridge of the flagship Unity, a massive vessel built from the combined knowledge of every Alliance civilization. Beside him stood Lucy and the friends who had been with him since the beginning. The fleet was larger, but it was also desperate. The Dominion had pulled ships from every corner of its crumbling empire, gathering everything it had for one final stand. The High itself was present, its consciousness spread across a dozen massive command ships, determined to crush the Alliance and restore supremacy. Samuel gave the order to attack. The battle began at dawn time, and it lasted for 18 hours. Ships exploded in silent flowers of flame. Debris fields formed and grew as vessels died. Communications crackled with orders and screams and final messages. Fell early in the battle. Her ship was surrounded by cruisers, and rather than surrender, she ordered her crew to abandon ship and rammed the largest enemy vessel. The explosion took out 3 ships and opened a hole in their formation that Alliance fighters poured through. The last battle crystal, crewed entirely by survivors of their genocide, targeted the primary command ship of the High. They knew they could not survive the attack, but they did not hesitate. The crystal sang as it dove through fire, and when it struck the command ship, the explosion was visible from 1,000 kilometers away. A piece of the High died with them. Samuel watched his people fight and die. He gave orders that sent ships into danger. He made choices that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he did not waver. He could not waver. Too many had sacrificed too much for him to fail now. Identified a weakness in the formation. The remaining command ships were clustered together, protecting what was left of the High. If they could break through, if they could reach those ships, they could end the war. Samuel ordered the Unity forward. The flagship pushed through lines, its shields failing, its hull torn by enemy fire. Crew members died at their stations, but others took their places. The ship kept moving, kept fighting, kept advancing. Lucy treated the wounded as they came to her medical bay. She worked with blood on her hands and tears in her eyes, saving everyone she could, praying for those she could not. Recorded everything, his voice steady even as the ship shook around him. He knew that he might die before he finished, but he also knew that the recording would survive. Someone would find it. Someone would know what happened here. The Unity reached the command cluster. Fired every weapon the ship had. Missiles and energy beams and kinetic rounds poured into the command ships. One by one, they exploded. One by one, pieces of the High died. When the last command ship fell, the remaining fleet stopped fighting. Without the to guide them, they were lost. They had never learned to think for themselves. They had never needed to. Now, suddenly, they were alone in their own minds for the first time in their existence. Samuel broadcast a message to both fleets. He said that the Dominion was ended. He said that the slaves were free and the conquered worlds were liberated. He said that the Alliance did not seek to rule only to stop them from ruling others. He told them to learn to live in peace, or the Alliance would return. The broken and confused accepted the terms. The war was over. The years that followed were difficult. Civilizations that had been destroyed needed to be rebuilt. Species that had been enemies needed to learn to live together. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. But the Alliance transformed into a federation, a council of equals where every species had a voice. They built something that had never existed before, a galaxy united not by conquest but by choice. Samuel Grant lived to see the first generation of children born in peace. He retired to Hope, the moon that had been their first headquarters, and spent his remaining years helping to build a new civilization. He died quietly in his sleep, surrounded by friends from a dozen species, his work finally done. Lucy Palmer became the Federation's first Minister of Health. She established hospitals on every member world and trained doctors who would save countless lives. She never stopped working, never stopped caring, never stopped believing that every life was worth fighting for. Engineering principles became the foundation of interstellar technology for centuries. She founded academies on a dozen worlds, teaching new generations to build and create. Her inventions powered ships and cities and civilizations, her legacy lasting long after she was gone. Price's histories were taught in schools across the galaxy. Children of every species learned about the war, about the sacrifices, about the courage of those who had fought. His archive grew to include millions of documents, a record of everything that had been and everything that was possible. The Eternal Dawn, too damaged to ever fly again, was preserved as a monument on hope. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see where it had all begun, to walk the corridors where humans had first awakened to find themselves in a galaxy crying out for heroes. A plaque at the entrance was written in 100 different languages. It said simply that the humans had slept while the galaxy burned. They had woken, and they had chosen to fight. It asked that all who read it would have such courage when their moment came. The galaxy had changed. Though once the terror of known space, learned slowly and painfully to live as one species among many. The civilizations they had destroyed began to rebuild. The species they had enslaved found their freedom. And humanity, those strange, soft creatures who had drifted through space while the galaxy suffered, became something they had never been on Earth. They became protectors and teachers and builders. They became proof that the universe could be made better through courage and sacrifice. They had awakened from their long sleep to find a galaxy in chains. And they had set it free.